Great. So our next invited speaker is Erik Valiquette. He's the co-founder and CEO of Blockchain Supply Chain Associations. So as you just heard, supply chain is one of the key areas that blockchain has played a role and is already in use. And it has been one of the topics of last year BTS conference. And this year we are reaching out to Erik to talk about their work in this domain. Thank you.
And thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you everybody for your time today. Yes, I am Erik. I am the president of the Canadian Blockchain Supply Chain Association and the global arm, which is the Blockchain Supply Chain Association, here to try to convince you to put 200% of your blockchain efforts behind supply chain applications. Because I know that the crypto people, they like their blockchain, but it's more about the crypto. I think Dominic just mentioned that. So thank you, Dominic, for bringing that up for me. Quickly, what we do, obligatory sales pitch about the association. We do three things. We do some advocacy work. And again, Dominic stole my thunder because I was going to explain to everybody why standards are so important on the global stage, where we need Canada to have a voice. I am currently the chair of the TC 307 Mirror Committee that represents Canada to ISO. So we do important work. We're actually going through a plenary meeting right now. Thank you, Vicky, for all the feedback this morning. But we also work with policymakers and help our members understand policy as it relates to supply chain. We do collaboration, of course, that's putting members together or working actively on specific projects. Again, Dominic stole my thunder. Thank you, Dominic. We did work actively on the canola technical spec documents, and we continue to work on other documents as well. And of course, education, explaining to the world why blockchain is not just about crypto, do webinars, events. We did participate in the SEC workshop, and we build courses as well for the supply chain community to better understand what blockchain is all about. Very quick snapshots of our community. So it's about, yes, the governing bodies, to technology, to folks like yourself in learning, bringing all those people into a community. Started off in Canada about 3 years ago, and now with global chapters and across South America, Europe, Africa, India, Australia, New Zealand, and we're going to open up another chapter in South America very shortly. Can't talk about that one yet. So what is supply chain, right? Everybody hears supply chain disruption, supply chain this, supply chain that. I mean, the clothes that we wear, the computers that we look at all day long, unless we're staring at the phones that we have in our hands, right? Those all come from somewhere else. The components in these phones, and there are about, I think, 200 different components, all come from different places in the world. And that is supply chain, right? It's putting stuff together, bringing it from very base material to the consumer's hand. So from mining or from agriculture, right, from the farm all the way to the fork, right, our mouths, our retailers, our hands, that is what supply chain is. And if we've seen something lately is that supply chains can be very chaotic. Disruptions because of pandemics, or I remember what was it in November, December in BC, right? You had floods that closed rail lines, wars right now, disrupting global supply chains around food. There are tons of different types of disruptions around supply chain, but a disruption that I've been living for the last 30 years in my career in the industry has been around bad data, bad information, and how we manage that information, which is why in our minds, supply chain is the perfect use for blockchain in conjunction, of course, with other technologies like IoT and AI. But blockchain can play a very mobilizing part in supply chain, as it will help or transform the way that we share information. And that's very important. Let me put down this phone for once. Big flashy numbers on screen. Kalea, I think, mentioned, trillions of dollars of potential out there, but the cost of managing bad information is also very costly. And I'll give you in a very oversimplified context in a supply chain context, what I mean by that. So if I'm sending you a shipment by truck across the country, and you forgot to tell me that you've moved your warehouse down the street, there is a direct cost to that. There's a cost of shipping it from the bad address to the new address, right? Maybe a small cost, but there is a cost. Through customs, if your paperwork is not adequate, you might get into detention or storage charges because customs won't release your paperwork. There is a cost to that. There is a cost for the desk level people to chase around emails and information all day long. And believe me, I have a lot of that in my career because I have been doing it for a long time. So this is a representation of a very, I was going to say simple supply chain. Supply chains are very complex, right? But they are still very linear. And what I mean by linear is that, for example, on screen, I'm showing a very, again, oversimplified representation of a supply chain. So the buyer would send a request, typically a purchase order, to a seller. The seller might be or might not be the manufacturer, right? So there might be a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 manufacturer, different components, different materials from around the world, assemble everything, give that to a carrier. 90% of the world's merchandise comes from somewhere else in the world, typically by ocean freights. So let's use ocean freight as an example. Crosses the ocean, would arrive at the port, would be handed over to governments like customs or food inspection or the FDA, right, or any other government entity that regulates or controls supply chain out there. Sometimes it would go to a warehouse and then be delivered to the final consumer or final buyer, right? In each of these cases, in today's supply chain in general, each of these parties have a different computer system, right? A different enterprise resource planning system, a different financial system. So these systems are very siloed today. Yes, you can do electronic data interchange, you can do EDI to send information between each other, but that is still very linear as a process. And each of these parties in a linear fashion is waiting for the party before him or her for information they need to do their business or make business decisions, right? So very siloed approach to supply chain. And this brings a lot of risk to our supply chains today. And again, we've seen so much of that risk come to life for the last few years. And especially, you know, as consumers, we are impacted. I mean, the early joke around pandemic was, you know, paper toilet hoarding. Just right now, we see baby formula having issues across North America. We have to import baby formula from overseas, right? So supply chains, again, are impacted very much these days because we can't talk to each other. We can't talk to each other between systems. We can't talk to each other between processes. We have to reconcile information between all these different data silos. And that is, again, very manual today, or mostly manual, meaning that, yes, I might get an email with a copy of the invoice, but I have to recreate that invoice in my computer system. And then if I have to send that information to somebody else in a PDF or an email, or God forbid, you're still using faxes today, and some people are, we have to rekey that information in the next computer system, right? And on and on and on. So there's a very large reconciliation burden, and I'll give you an example later on in the presentation. But again, there are a lot of risks. Now, in a blockchain supply chain, especially using the shared ledger portion of DLTs, and yes, the blockchain or the chain of blocks has a very useful case in supply chain as well. But from a shared ledger perspective, imagine not having to wait for the party before you to send information, right? If we're all sharing this ledger, if we all have real-time information between ourselves, we can be a lot more efficient and we can make better business decisions. We can automate, We can create the smart contracts that transfers not just the financial, but the ownership of goods. We can use NFTs, right, to transfer the ownership of goods. And it's been used. Instead of using a paper document at a port, someone has used an NFT to transfer the ownership of 30,000 30,000 metric tons of grain, as an example. So it's doable. A lot of barriers still, a lot around understanding, or a lot around digitization aspects of the supply chain. And again, it is doable. And before everybody kind of gets scared of well, I'm going to share all my information on a shared ledger between everybody, everybody's going to see everything. We all know that's not the case, right? We can share certain aspects, we can code the smart contracts so that certain parties have access to certain different things. As an example, does customs need a copy of the bill of lading or the purchase order? Yeah, they might need a copy of the bill of lading. You give them access. Do they need a copy of the purchase order? Not necessarily. You don't give them access, but it is there on the ledger for folks to act on it if they have the permission. So real-time data sharing is what is making blockchain so beautiful in supply chain. Other vehicles of data sharing, absolutely. Blockchain brings a different level. I mean, I'm trying to explain this to the wrong crowd. You know the benefits of DLTs, but from a supply chain perspective, very powerful. And this is what I typically give to the supply chain crowd, right? So again, distributed, no central point of failure, real-time information, smart contracts to automate, audit trails, of course. And the beauty of everything is that transportation companies, manufacturers don't need to blow up all their existing systems. We can use DLTs and blockchain as an added value to existing systems as we move our technology forward. Again, I'll talk to you a quick example about that. Speaking of, I always bring this example up. A lot of people know about it. Walmart Canada put their transportation management system on blockchain. Thank you to DLT Labs of Toronto. Let me run through quickly that if I have time quickly on what the process is. So in your typical shipment, remember that linear supply chain. Pick up the goods, carry the goods, deliver the goods, invoice for your services, right? If you're a trucking company or a steamship liner, an airline or a courier. So you do something, you invoice. If there's a dispute on an invoice, you fight over the dispute until resolve it, back and forth emails. Once the dispute is resolved, then you pay your invoice, right? In the Walmart case, they identified 11 steps to this. So from doing the stuff to disputing the invoice to paying the invoice. That brought in a 70% rate of dispute on the invoices. So Walmart does about 500,000 shipments annually with 70 different trucking companies. 70% of those invoices had a dispute on it for whatever reason, right? Wrongly invoiced, a surcharge that we're expecting, you name it. So 70%, a lot of money in waiting 6 to 8 weeks for it to be paid. In many cases, Walmart actually overpaid. And imagine the reconciliation, the back and forth emails between the trucking companies and Walmart and the freight payment people, just going back and forth and fighting out over invoices. Using blockchain, they were able to shared ledger, common visibility, beautiful platform, IoT devices, trusted information, geolocation, blockchain, right, as trusted information, as a trusted ledger, to eliminate 6 of these 11 steps, bringing it down to 5. And the key to this is, instead of doing something, invoicing, fighting, paying, they do something, they generate the invoice at that point, right? So not after the fact, they generate. If a dispute happens, either they can, since they're all on a beautiful shared platform, they can act on it right away if it's something that's in their control. But using the IoT devices, the information about geolocation and time and place and condition, if it's food, for example, with sensors, all automated, and that became the trusted information. So they can now trust the information of a dispute in real time and act on it in real time, even before the shipment is actually delivered. And by doing that, they were able to eliminate virtually 100% of the dispute. So from 70% down to below 1%, just by changing the way they trust information, again, because of blockchain. Do the shipment, start the invoice, generate the dispute or trust the information about the dispute, issue the final invoice, pay the invoice because the dispute was eliminated beforehand and not after the fact. Very powerful. And this is something that happens in our supply chains in transportation every day. So again, very powerful. Is it just Walmart that's doing it?
Just a comment, Eric, to interrupt you.
Yes.
So we have you should try to be on time. Could you please?
So I will finish in 30 seconds. So is it just Walmart? No, we have mining, we have food, we have retail, we have pharma. A lot of people are doing it. Is it just the small ones, the big ones? Ton of people different there are doing it today, and I will speed that up. Thank you very much. My apologies for running a bit long, and thank you.